Grace thought survival would feel louder. Movies taught her that the girl who lives gets a swelling score, a sunrise, a final breath where everything makes sense. Reality gave her fluorescent lighting, a courtroom that smelled like lemon disinfectant, and a therapist who kept asking her how the trauma manifested. Grace wanted to tell her it manifested as silence, thick, adhesive silence that followed her everywhere, clung to her clothes, crawled into bed with her at night. Instead, she said, "I don't sleep much." That was true. Sleep had become a game of hide-and-seek she always lost. Whenever her eyes closed, she felt the old house breathing again, the Le Domus mansion, its walls sweating history, its corridors listening. She'd survived that blood-soaked night by inches and accidents, by luck and rage and a bride's dress turned red with inheritance she never asked for. The world called it a tragedy. The tabloids called it billionaire family cult massacre. Grace called it Tuesday. Years later, she lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner in a city that tried very hard not to remember her. She worked as a crisis counselor for women escaping violent homes, ironic enough to make the universe laugh. She drank oat milk because it upset her stomach less than regular milk. She avoided antiques. She avoided weddings. She avoided games. The nightmares didn't avoid her. They'd changed over time. At first, it was the obvious stuff, crossbows, screaming servants, the wet sound of bodies hitting marble. Then the dreams got clever. Now the house wasn't a house. Sometimes it was a country club. Sometimes a yacht. Sometimes a hospital with white-gloved surgeons smiling beneath their masks. Different rooms, same rules. Hide. Run. Pray. Wake up before they find you. Grace learned the new ritual of survival: check the locks, scan the shadows, count the exits. She told herself this was vigilance, not paranoia. Therapists loved that word. Hypervigilance. A polite way to say, your nervous system is a loaded gun pointed at the world. On the anniversary of the massacre, Grace woke to a knock at her door. 3 sharp raps. Not the neighbor's lazy thump. Not a delivery driver's hopeful tap. This knock had posture. She didn't answer. She never answered. The knocking came again, 2 quick beats, then one, like a rhythm you were supposed to recognize. Grace slid from bed and padded barefoot to the kitchen, keeping low. She took the knife from the magnetic strip on the wall. It wasn't ceremonial. It was practical. 8 inches of steel that had never let her down. Grace, a voice called softly through the door. Male. Pleasant. Educated. The kind of voice that asked for donations and expected them. We just want to talk. Her stomach went cold. Not because of fear, because of familiarity. That tone. That confidence that came from believing doors existed to be opened. She crept closer and peered through the peephole. The man outside was impeccably dressed, rain beating on his tailored coat. He smiled like he was already inside. Behind him, the hallway lights flickered, and for a moment Grace swore she saw someone else standing just out of frame, tall, still, watching. Wrong apartment, she said, steady. Go away. The man chuckled, gentle as a bedtime story. You survived something extraordinary, Grace. That makes you, historically significant. Her name. He said it like a compliment. I'm calling the police. Of course, he said. We'd expect nothing less. She stepped back, heart hammering. Her phone was on the counter. As she reached for it, something slid under the door with a soft, deliberate whisper. An envelope. Thick. Cream-colored. Embossed. Grace didn't need to open it to know. But she did. Inside was a card. Heavy stock. Gold lettering. Ready or not. Here I come. Her pulse roared in her ears. Beneath the card was a photograph, grainy, candid. Grace on the street outside her building, laughing at something someone had said. Taken. Maybe this morning. On the back, handwritten in careful ink, the game thanks you for surviving. The game remembers its debts. The knocking stopped. Silence rushed in, too loud to ignore. Grace stood alone in her kitchen, knife in one hand, invitation in the other, and finally understood the truth she'd been running from since the night she escaped the mansion barefoot and screaming into dawn. The Le Domes family had been amateurs. The game hadn't ended. It had only been recruiting. And this time, it wasn't playing hide and seek. This time, it was playing for revenge. Grace burned the invitation in her sink. She didn't do it dramatically. No trembling hands. No whispered curses. She simply held a lighter to the corner of the thick card and watched the flame crawl across the gold lettering like it had been hungry all along. The paper blackened, curled, and collapsed into itself. Ash drifted down the drain, where it stuck stubbornly to the metal as if refusing to leave. Good, she muttered. Stay dead. She washed her hands 3 times afterward. The smell of smoke lingered anyway. That night, Grace didn't sleep at all. She sat on the couch with the lights on, knife on the coffee table, television muted. Every shadow twitched. Every sound, the dry cleaner's late-night machinery below, a car passing outside, the hum of the refrigerator, felt rehearsed. She kept thinking about the photograph. About how close someone had been. About how survival, apparently, made you collectible. At 3:17 a.m., her phone buzzed. No number. No notification sound she recognized. Just a vibration that felt deliberate, like a finger tapping her spine. She stared at the screen for a full minute before answering. Hello. Static breathed on the other end. Then a voice, familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. Grace, it said warmly. You always did take things a bit too seriously. Her grip tightened. That's not funny. I'm not joking, the voice replied. I'm dead. That's the punchline. She closed her eyes. Daniel Le Domes. Or what was left of him in her memory, his crooked smile, his half-drunk confidence, the way he'd almost helped her, almost been decent, before the house demanded its due. She'd watched him explode along with the rest of them, red mist and bone fragments painting the walls like modern art. You're not real, she said. This is a prank. Or a recording. Ah, Daniel said lightly. I was hoping you'd say that. The static sharpened, then cleared. His voice dropped, lost its humor. Do you know how many families play the game, Grace? Her blood went cold. Hundreds, he continued. Old money. New money. Tech money. Political money. Families that smile on magazine covers and donate wings to children's hospitals. Le Domes were just, enthusiastic. Grace swallowed. If this is some sick joke. You burned the invitation, Daniel said. That was rude. Her stomach twisted. How do you know that? Because, he replied, almost tenderly, the house always knows where its pieces are. The line went dead. Grace threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall, skittering to the floor like a wounded insect. She stood there shaking, breath coming too fast, memories slamming into her all at once. The chanting. The guns. The way the walls had seemed to lean inward as if eager. By morning, she had made a decision. Running hadn't saved her last time. It had only delayed the inevitable. She packed a bag, light, practical. Clothes she could move in. Cash. The knife. A second knife she'd taped under the sink months ago, just in case. She cut her hair in the bathroom mirror, uneven chunks falling into the sink, her reflection looking stranger with every snip. Survivors didn't get to keep their old faces. Her destination wasn't random. She drove 6 hours north to a place that didn't officially exist. The house sat at the end of a private road, surrounded by iron gates and trees too old to care. It wasn't the Le Domes mansion, but it felt like its cousin, same arrogance, same certainty that the world would bend around it. Grace parked across the street and watched through binoculars she'd bought at a sporting goods store with cash. Guests were arriving. Black cars. Polished shoes. Laughter that rang too loud. One woman stepped out wearing a red dress and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. She moved like she owned the air around her. Grace felt a prickle of instinct, predator recognizing predator. Then she saw him. Daniel. Or someone who looked exactly like him. He stood at the top of the steps. Greeting guests, solid and whole and very much not exploded. His smile was wider now. Hungrier. When he laughed, Grace felt it in her bones. Her phone buzzed again. A new one this time. Burner. She hadn't even activated it yet. Unknown, ready or not. Grace lowered the binoculars, heart pounding, something dark and electric stirring beneath her fear. Rage, maybe. Or clarity. She typed back with steady thumbs. Grace, you should have killed me when you had the chance. Across the street, Daniel's head snapped up. His eyes scanned the trees. When they landed on Grace's hiding place, his smile stretched into something inhuman. The woman in red followed his gaze. She tilted her head, curious. Interested. Grace watched them both and finally understood the new rules. The game wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about who learned faster. And Grace was done being the prey. Kitchen knife. Grace didn't leave when she should have. That was the first mistake. Or maybe the first lesson. She stayed hidden across the street long after the last black car disappeared behind the iron gates. Dusk pressed down on the estate, turning its windows into dark, watching eyes. Somewhere inside, laughter drifted out, polite, cultured, the sound of people who believed nothing bad could ever really happen to them. Grace knew better. She waited until night settled fully, until the road was empty and the trees began to whisper to each other. The gate wasn't locked the way it should have been. It never was. Wealth didn't bother with locks. It relied on distance, on laws, on the unspoken agreement that no one like Grace would dare cross the line. She crossed it anyway. The gravel crunched too loudly under her boots. Every sound felt amplified, like the house itself was leaning closer to listen. She moved low, cutting across manicured lawns that smelled faintly of chemicals and decay. The building loomed larger with every step, its architecture an insult, too clean, too intentional, like a monument to entitlement. A side door stood ajar. Grace froze. She hadn't opened it. She was sure of that. The gap was narrow, inviting in the way a mouth is inviting when it smiles without warmth. From inside came a soft sound, breathing. No. Pages turning. Grace slid the knife into her palm and slipped inside. The interior was nothing like the Le Domes mansion. No dusty relics. No creaking floors. This place was modern, minimalist, and somehow worse for it. White walls. Sharp lines. Everything designed to be easily cleaned. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and expensive cologne. A long hallway stretched ahead. At the end, a single door glowed with warm light. Voices drifted through. Symbolism matters, a woman was saying. Her voice was smooth, amused. The survivor disrupts the narrative. People like narratives. Grace recognized the woman in red without seeing her. Catherine Newton's character, though Grace didn't know her name yet, spoke like someone explaining a joke she'd already decided you wouldn't get. Another voice responded, male, older. The ritual has rules. A third voice laughed. Daniels. The rules evolve. Grace's heart pounded so hard she was sure they could hear it. She edged closer, pressing herself flat against the wall beside the door. The knife felt too small now. Too honest. The woman continued. Grace is proof the game failed. That's intolerable. Failure spreads. So we correct it, Daniel said lightly. We finish what was started. Grace's jaw tightened. Finish. Like she was a sentence that had gone on too long. She leaned closer, and the floor shifted beneath her foot. Not creaked. Shifted. Grace barely had time to react before the hallway lights snapped on, blindingly bright. The floor beneath her boots dropped an inch, then locked into place with a metallic click. A trap. The door at the end swung open. They stood there like they'd been waiting all along. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, looking infuriatingly alive. His eyes were brighter than she remembered. Sharper. Like something had hollowed him out and filled the space with purpose. The woman in red stepped forward beside him. Up close, her beauty was unsettling, too perfect, like a mask grown directly onto bone. She smiled at Grace with genuine delight. There you are, she said. I told you she'd come. Grace backed up. The hallway behind her was suddenly shorter. Narrower. The walls seemed closer than they had a moment ago. Who are you? Grace demanded. The woman placed a hand on her chest theatrically. Oh. Where are my manners? I'm Eleanor. And I'm a believer. Daniel chuckled. She's very big on traditions. Traditions are just peer pressure from dead people, Eleanor replied. Then her eyes sharpened. But ours are persuasive. Grace glanced around, calculating exits. None. The side door she'd entered through was gone. Replaced by a seamless wall. This isn't real, Grace said, though she didn't believe it. You can't do this. Eleanor tilted her head. You'd be amazed what money can do. Daniel stepped forward. The Le Domes family thought they were special, he said. Chosen. Truth is, they were just loud. Sloppy. They didn't understand the scope. He gestured, and the wall behind them lit up. Screens. Dozens of them. Each showed a different location, mansions, yachts, penthouses, forests lit by torchlight. In every screen, people ran. Screamed. Hid. Blood-smeared marble, grass, silk. Games. All of them happening now. Grace felt bile rise in her throat. It's not one family, Eleanor said softly. It's a network. A faith. And you, Grace, you became our heresy. The floor beneath Grace shifted again. The click echoed louder this time. Daniel's smile faded, just slightly. Ready or not, he said. The hallway split open beneath Grace's feet. She fell screaming into darkness as laughter followed her down, the house rearranging itself with eager precision. The game had begun again. And this time, it knew her name. Grace hit the floor hard. Something swallowing her whole. Grace ran. Her boots slapped against concrete as lights ahead flickered on and off, like blinking eyes. The carvings on the walls grew denser the farther she went. Words stood out in the harsh light. Please. I won. They changed it. Her chest tightened. The corridor split into 3 paths. Grace skidded to a stop, heart pounding. No signs. No clues. Just 3 identical tunnels disappearing into darkness. A countdown began. Numbers appeared on the wall in glowing red. 10. 9. Tick-tock, Daniel sang. Choose poorly and it gets messy. Grace closed her eyes for half a second. Thought back to the mansion. The weapons. The arrogance. They loved watching people panic. Loved obvious choices. She went left. The moment she crossed the threshold, the floor dropped. Grace screamed as she slid downward, barely managing to jam her knife into the wall. Sparks flew as the blade scraped concrete. She slammed into a lower level hard enough to rattle her teeth. Alarms blared. Lights strobed. The tunnel behind her sealed shut. Ahead, something moved. Grace staggered to her feet, pulse roaring in her ears. The space opened into a wide chamber, circular, with a high ceiling lost in shadow. Chains hung from above, swaying gently. The floor was slick, reflective. Not water. Blood. Fresh. Sticky. Warm. Grace gagged. A shape detached itself from the darkness across the room. A man stepped forward, trembling. He wore a tuxedo torn at the seams, his face streaked with tears and blood. His eyes locked onto Grace with wild relief. "Oh, thank God," he sobbed. "You're real. You're real, right?" Grace froze. "Who are you?" "Ethan," he said. "They told me if I found you, I could live." Her stomach dropped. Behind her, the speaker crackled again. "Rule twist," Eleanor said brightly. "This round requires participation." Chains rattled. Grace turned just in time to see metal cuffs snap shut around Ethan's wrists. He screamed as the chains yanked him backward, lifting him off the floor. The blood beneath him rippled. "Only one of you leaves this room," Daniel said. His voice softened. "Make it interesting." The floor between Grace and Ethan began to change. Panels shifted. Slots opened. Weapons rose slowly from beneath the blood, knives, hammers, a crossbow. Grace backed away, shaking her head. "No. I'm not doing this." Ethan sobbed harder. "Please. I have kids. I don't even believe in this shit. I just married into the wrong family." The chains jerked, cutting him off with a scream as his shoulders dislocated. Grace's breath came in ragged gasps. This wasn't hide and seek. This was something worse. This was comedy. Dark. Ironic. Cruel. The kind where the punchline was always a corpse. "Choose," Eleanor said softly. "Or the room will." The lights flickered faster. The walls began to inch inward. The blood on the floor warmed, releasing a metallic stench that burned Grace's nose. Ethan's eyes met hers. And in them, Grace saw herself from years ago, trapped, pleading, disposable. Something inside her snapped. Grace stepped forward. Not toward the weapons. Toward the chains. The audience laughed. They always laughed before they realized the joke had turned on them. Grace moved before the room could decide for her. She sprinted straight at Ethan, not with the knife raised, not toward the weapons rising seductively from the floor, but toward the chains yanking him apart piece by piece. The audience laughter swelled, delighted by the apparent misdirection. They thought they understood her now. They always did. Grace jumped. She slammed into Ethan's legs, knocking his swinging body into her shoulder. Pain exploded through her ribs, but she ignored it. With one brutal motion, she drove her knife into the chain link above his cuff and twisted. Metal shrieked. Sparks flew. The chain didn't break, but it jammed. Ethan screamed as the mechanism stuttered, his body dropping just enough for his feet to scrape the floor. Grace didn't stop. She stabbed again. And again. The knife bent. Her hands blistered. The blood-slick floor stole her footing. "Grace," Daniel's voice said, suddenly sharper. Less amused. "That's not how this works." "Change the rules," Eleanor added, her tone still playful but tight. "The room will punish you." The walls lurched inward another inch. Grace looked up at Ethan. His face was gray, eyes glassy with shock. "Listen to me," she said, breathless. "When I say run, you run. Don't stop. Don't look back." I can't," he gasped. "Yes, you can," she snapped. "They're lying. They always are." She yanked the knife free and slashed at the second chain, not the metal, but the exposed hydraulic line feeding it. Blood wasn't the only thing slicking this room. Fluid sprayed out in a pressurized arc. The chain went slack. Ethan crashed to the floor with a sob. Alarms wailed, louder now, angry. The walls shuddered violently, then stopped moving altogether. Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The dangerous kind. Grace hauled Ethan up. Now. They ran. A door burst open on the far side of the chamber as if reluctantly acknowledging their defiance. Grace shoved Ethan through first, then dove after him just as the chains snapped back into place behind them, missing her by inches. The door slammed shut. They tumbled into darkness, breath ragged, hearts pounding in unison. Emergency lights flickered on, revealing a narrow service tunnel that smelled of rust and mold. Ethan collapsed against the wall, sobbing uncontrollably. Grace slid down beside him, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then slow clapping echoed through the tunnel. Lights brightened. Eleanor stood at the far end, immaculate as ever, hands applauding softly. Daniel leaned beside her, jaw tight, eyes cold. "Well," Eleanor said. "That was unexpected." Daniel didn't smile. "You broke the room." Grace dragged herself to her feet, knife raised despite the way her arm trembled. "You said only one of us leaves." Eleanor shrugged. "Rules are flexible." "Funny," Grace said hoarsely. "You don't look amused." Daniel's eyes flicked to Ethan. "He's not supposed to be alive." Ethan whimpered. Eleanor sighed. "This is why I said she was different. Survivors adapt. They improvise. They make things messy." Grace laughed, a sharp, broken sound that surprised even her. "You want clean. Play with mannequins." Daniel stepped forward. "Do you know what you've done?" Grace met his gaze. "I've learned." The lights overhead flickered. Somewhere deep in the structure, gears groaned, recalibrating. "You see," Grace continued, voice steadier now, "you built all this for people who freeze. People who beg. People who think the game is fair." She gestured at the walls, the cameras she knew were watching. "You didn't plan for someone who's already lost everything." Eleanor studied her, eyes bright with something close to admiration. "She's right." Daniel shot her a look. "Don't encourage her." "Oh, I intend to," Eleanor replied. "The audience loves escalation." She turned back to Grace. "You've changed the narrative. Congratulations. That makes you a feature." Grace's stomach dropped. "I'm not playing anymore." Eleanor smiled wider. "Oh, Grace. You're the game now." The tunnel shook. Doors ahead and behind slammed shut. The walls shifted, reconfiguring, hurting them forward. Ethan grabbed Grace's sleeve. "I can't do this again." Grace looked at him, really looked, at his fear, his exhaustion, the way his hands shook just like hers had years ago. "You don't have to," she said quietly. She shoved him sideways as a hidden panel burst open beneath the floor. Ethan screamed as he fell away into darkness. Grace didn't look down. The door ahead opened. She ran. Behind her, Eleanor's laughter echoed, delighted and sharp. "See?" Eleanor called. "She learns faster when she bleeds." Grace sprinted into the next nightmare, lungs burning, mind razor clear. They wanted a monster. Fine. She would show them what survival eventually turns into. Kitchen knife. Grace burst into light. Not natural light, nothing here was, but a cavernous hall flooded with a sterile white glow that made every surface look guilty. The door sealed behind her with a hiss like a held breath finally released. She stumbled forward, lungs screaming, sweat cold on her spine. The room was enormous. Cathedral-sized. A parody of grandeur. Tiered balconies rose in a perfect circle around her, stacked 3 stories high. On them stood people, dozens, maybe hundreds, dressed in evening wear and masks of polished porcelain, gold leaf, velvet black lacquer. Animals. Gods. Smiling faces frozen in eternal delight. An audience. Grace slowed to a stop at the center of the floor. The ground beneath her feet was glass. She looked down. Below the glass was a maze, tight corridors, blind corners, crawlspaces barely wide enough for a body. And inside the maze, people ran. Some limped. Some crawled. Some lay very still. Blood smeared the walls like fingerprints left by ghosts. A spotlight snapped on above her. Applause erupted. Real applause. Thunderous. Joyful. Grace turned in a slow circle, knife hanging uselessly at her side. She felt very small. Very visible. Daniel's voice boomed through hidden speakers, amplified, theatrical. Ladies and gentlemen, patrons and partners, welcome to the main event. The crowd cheered. Grace's jaw clenched. You brought me here to perform? Eleanor stepped into the light from a raised platform opposite her. She wore a new dress, black this time, sharp lines, severe beauty. Her red dress had been for seduction. This was for war. Of course, Eleanor said. Stories need structure. Survivors need context. She gestured downward. You see the maze? Grace nodded once. That's phase 1, Eleanor continued. Legacy games. Inherited sins. Very traditional. Very dull. Daniel appeared beside her, adjusting his cufflinks. Phase 2 is where things get interesting. A section of the glass floor beneath Grace lit up. A digital map appeared, lines. Nodes, blinking red dots. Grace recognized the pattern immediately. It wasn't random. It was her. Her apartment. Her workplace. The diner she went to on Sundays. Route she took without thinking. Her life. You've been busy, Grace said, voice flat. Daniel smiled thinly. You were sloppy. Eleanor leaned forward, elbows on the railing. The maze below is filled with players who believe they're the protagonists. They think survival is personal. She tapped a button on a small remote. The maze shifted. Walls moved. Paths closed. Traps reset. Screams rose faintly from below. Grace's grip tightened on the knife until her knuckles burned. What do you want from me? Daniel's eyes glittered. Participation. Eleanor finished it for him. Transformation. The lights dimmed. A new spotlight illuminated a glass case rising from the floor beside Grace. Inside were weapons, familiar ones. Crossbows. Axes. Antique rifles. And something new. A small black earpiece. Grace stared at it. Eleanor's smile sharpened. You hunt now. The audience leaned forward as one. You guide the maze, Daniel said. You choose which paths open. Which traps spring. Which people live long enough to be entertaining. Grace laughed softly, incredulous. You think I'll do your job for you? Eleanor tilted her head. I think you already have. Grace's laughter died. Memories flashed, Ethan falling, her not looking back. The way she'd calculated, chosen, survived. The way something cold and efficient had taken over when mercy became a liability. Eleanor's voice dropped, intimate despite the distance. You don't freeze anymore, Grace. You don't beg. You adapt. That's not innocence. That's evolution. The audience murmured appreciatively. Daniel stepped closer to the edge. If you refuse, we release the maze fully autonomous. No guidance. No mercy. Everyone dies very quickly. Grace looked down again. A woman below tripped, sobbing as something mechanical clicked behind her. A child, too young, Jesus Christ, was hiding in a dead end, hands over his mouth, eyes wide with terror. Grace's chest constricted. You're sick, she whispered. Eleanor shrugged. We're honest. The earpiece clicked to life in Grace's hand. A soft voice spoke directly into her ear. Her own. Recorded. Calm. Cold. Rule adaptation improves survival outcomes. Grace's stomach dropped. They had studied her. Modeled her. Turned her trauma into an algorithm. Daniel watched her carefully. Choose. The audience fell silent. Grace closed her eyes. For one terrifying second, she felt the pull, the clarity, the control, the seductive promise that if she just leaned into the monster they wanted, she could end this. She could decide who lived. Who died. She could stop running forever. Then she remembered the bride's dress. The blood. The lie that surviving meant winning. Grace opened her eyes. She smiled. Slow. Crooked. Terrifying. Eleanor's breath caught. Just slightly. Grace slipped the earpiece into her ear. Applause exploded. Good girl, Daniel said. Grace raised her knife and pointed it, not at the maze. At the glass beneath her feet. Rule update, Grace said clearly. She brought the knife down with everything she had. The glass spiderwebbed, but didn't break. The audience gasped. Grace stabbed again. And again. Cracks spread, racing outward like lightning. Eleanor shouted, "Stop her." Too late. Grace drove the knife into a weak point and jumped back as the glass gave way. The floor collapsed. Grace fell. So did the maze. Screams tore through the hall as the carefully controlled system failed catastrophically, walls slamming, traps misfiring, paths opening where none should exist. Chaos. Real chaos. Grace hit the ground hard, rolling, bones screaming, but alive. Around her, survivors scrambled, confused, terrified, free in the worst possible way. Above, the audience panicked. Eleanor screamed, not in fear, but in rage. Daniel stared down through the shattered glass, expression unreadable. Grace staggered to her. Feet among the wreckage, blood on her face, a feral grin splitting her lips. You wanted a monster, she yelled up at them. Her eyes burned. Come hunt me. Monsters didn't hide. They burned the house down. The alarms didn't sound like warnings anymore. They sounded like panic. Red lights flooded the ruins of the maze, bathing everything in the color of exposed muscle. Smoke hissed from ruptured vents. Walls that had once moved with smug precision now spasmed unpredictably, grinding and shrieking like a wounded animal trying to remember how to walk. Grace ran. Not blindly, never blindly, but with intent. She moved through the wreckage with a strange calm, stepping over debris, past people sobbing in corners, past bodies that no longer twitched. Her ankles screamed with every step, but pain had become background noise. Pain was old news. The earpiece was still in her ear. It crackled. Then Eleanor's voice slipped in, silk wrapped around a blade. You've made quite a mess. Grace smiled despite herself. You should see your audience. She ducked as a section of ceiling collapsed where she'd been standing a second earlier. Timing. Instinct. Experience bought in blood. You misunderstand, Eleanor continued. They're not afraid of you. Grace burst into a stairwell and took the steps two at a time. No. They're thrilled, Eleanor said. Unscripted chaos. Authentic terror. This is premium. Grace laughed, loud, sharp, a bark of disbelief that echoed down the stairwell. You people really can't tell the difference between entertainment and consequence, can you? A pause. Then Daniel's voice cut in, colder now. Stripped of charm. Where are you going, Grace? She didn't answer. She burst through a door marked security, authorized personnel only, and found exactly what she'd hoped for. A control room. Banks of monitors flickered erratically, feeds switching between cameras as systems fought to reassert dominance. Technicians in headsets lay slumped over consoles, some unconscious, some very clearly not breathing. One man crawled weakly toward an exit, leaving a dark smear behind him. Grace stepped over him. She went straight to the central console and slammed her hand down on the keyboard. You won't understand what you're looking at, Daniel said. It's proprietary. Grace snorted. I work crisis response. Your system runs on fear, incentives, and bad assumptions. You made it idiot-proof. She ripped the earpiece from her ear and slammed it onto the console. The screen blinked. Access granted. Eleanor inhaled sharply over the comms. That's not possible. Grace's fingers flew. She didn't know every command, but she knew enough. She pulled up schematics. Network maps. Live biometric data. Names began to populate the screens. Not aliases. Real names. Wealthy names. Political names. Philanthropic names. Patrons. Smile, Grace murmured. You're on camera. She hit enter. Across the facility, doors unlocked. Cells opened. Cages, yes, actual cages, slid apart with metallic shrieks. Grace watched as the maze feeds filled with movement, not hunted scrambling, but people rising together, eyes wild, desperate, alive. Screams turned into shouts. Shouts turned into rage. Daniel's voice was no longer calm. Shut it down. Eleanor sounded almost breathless now, not with fear, but fascination. She's reversing the flow. Grace leaned closer to the microphone. You taught me something important tonight. She toggled another switch. The audience feeds came online. Faces behind masks filled the screens, confused, furious, suddenly aware they were no longer invisible. You taught me, Grace continued, that laughter is a weapon. She pressed a final button. The speakers throughout the hall crackled. Then Grace's voice echoed everywhere. Clear. Human. Unfiltered. Attention, she said. If you're hearing this, you were invited because someone thinks you're disposable. People froze. Listened. You were hunted for sport, Grace went on. Your fear was monetized. Your pain was entertainment. The sound of breaking glass. Shouting. A gunshot. Grace watched it all, pulse steady. You don't have to be prey, she said softly. But you do have to move. She cut the feed. For the first time since this nightmare began, the system went quiet. No commentary. No laughter. Just chaos. Grace turned from the console and limped toward the exit. That's when Eleanor stepped out of the shadows. Up close, without the distance and spectacle, Eleanor looked human. Pale. Breathing too fast. Her eyes were bright with something dangerous and sincere. You're extraordinary, Eleanor said. Do you know that? Grace raised the knife. Get out of my way. Eleanor didn't. You could burn us down completely. Or, she smiled, you could replace us. Grace felt it then. The temptation. The awful logic. People like you don't disappear, Eleanor said gently. You either become ghosts, or gods. Grace stared at her. Then she laughed. A real laugh. Ugly. Free. Oh, Grace said. You still think this is about power? She lunged, not to stab, but to shove. Eleanor stumbled back, shocked, hitting the railing behind her. For a split second, fear flickered across her face. Grace leaned in close. This is about ending the joke. She turned and ran as the facility tore itself apart behind her. Eleanor's laughter followed her, high, delighted, unbroken. Daniel's voice echoed once more through the crumbling halls, almost admiring. She's not running anymore. Grace burst into the night air, lungs burning, sirens wailing in the distance, real ones this time. She didn't stop. Because the game wasn't over. It had just escaped the house. And now? Now it was loose in the world. Grace didn't feel free when she reached the road. She felt exposed. Cold night air scraped her lungs as she staggered away from the compound, trees blurring past, sirens swelling and fading like uncertain ghosts. Her body moved on instinct alone, left foot, right foot, don't stop, while her mind lagged behind, still trapped under glass floors and laughing masks. Behind her, the facility burned. Not with flames, yet, but with consequence. Emergency lights pulsed through the trees like a dying heartbeat. Helicopters thudded overhead, circling, indecisive. Grace knew better than to trust them. Authority had been invited to this game a long time ago. Authority had RSVP'd yes. She ducked into the forest and kept moving until the sirens blurred into background noise. Only then did she let herself breathe. Her hands were shaking violently now. The adrenaline had nowhere to go. She pressed her back against a tree and slid down, retching into the leaves. Nothing came up but bile and air. She laughed weakly at that. You win, she whispered to no one. I get it. A branch snapped. Grace froze. Her knife was in her hand before her fear caught up. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, unafraid of being heard. Easy, a voice said. Female. Young. Familiar in the way a melody is familiar when you don't remember where you learned it. If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't announce myself. Grace angled the blade toward the sound. Show yourself. Catherine Newton's character stepped into the moonlight. She looked nothing like Eleanor. She was dressed down, boots, dark jacket, hair pulled back messily. Her face was smudged with dirt, eyes bright and alive and amused, like she'd just stepped out of a bar fight she enjoyed losing. Hi, she said cheerfully. I've been dying to meet you. Grace didn't lower the knife. Another believer? The woman shrugged. Depends on the day. She took a few steps closer, hands visible, posture relaxed in a way that screamed confidence. Name's Lila. I was supposed to intercept you inside. Grace's jaw tightened. You're with them. Lila smiled. I'm adjacent. Grace lunged. Lila moved fast, faster than she looked, twisting out of reach, hooking Grace's wrist and redirecting the blade into a tree trunk. The impact rattled Grace's bones. Whoa, Lila said lightly. You really are fun. Grace tore her arm free and swung again. Lila ducked, grabbed Grace's injured ankle, and sent her crashing to the ground. They lay there for a moment, breathing hard, staring at each other. You could have killed me, Grace hissed. Yep, Lila agreed. Still could. Why didn't you? Lila considered that. Curiosity. She rolled to her feet and offered Grace a hand. Grace didn't take it. Lila shrugged and sat on a rock instead. You broke a very expensive toy tonight. People are furious. People who don't like losing. Grace pushed herself up painfully. Then kill me and collect your bonus. Lila laughed, a bright, genuine sound that didn't belong anywhere near blood and rituals. God, no. They want you alive. Symbolism, remember? Grace stiffened. What do you want? Lila's smile faded just a touch. I want the ritual finished. Grace's grip tightened. Over my dead body. That's usually how it goes, Lila said softly. But hear me out. She stood, stepping closer again, not threatening, not afraid. The network is ancient. Older than Ludomes. Older than Eleanor. The ritual feeds on imbalance, wealth without consequence, power without fear. Every generation, it demands correction. Grace barked a laugh. By murdering people. By reminding the world who really runs it, Lila said. The game keeps the elites afraid of collapse. It keeps the hierarchy honest. Grace stared at her, disgust churning with a strange, unwanted understanding. You believe this? I believe something works, Lila replied. And you broke it. A distant explosion rolled through the trees. Lila glanced back toward the compound, eyes glittering. You didn't just escape. You exposed them. The board is fractured now. Factions are forming. Grace felt a chill deeper than fear. You're talking about a war. Lila smiled again, wider this time. I'm talking about evolution. She leaned in, voice dropping. You can't go back to your old life, Grace. You know that. You're too visible now. Too inspiring. Grace's chest tightened. She hated that word. You can run, Lila continued. They'll hunt you forever. Or you can finish the ritual. On your terms. And what does that look like? Grace asked. Lila's eyes gleamed. The hunted becomes the judge. Silence stretched between them. Grace thought of the maze. The child hiding. The masks watching. The way the system had learned her voice. You're wrong, Grace said finally. I'm not your solution. Lila tilted her head. Then what are you? Grace stepped closer, knife steady, eyes burning. I'm the consequence. Sirens surged again, closer now. Lila stepped back, hands raised, laughing softly. Ready or not, Grace, she said. Here we come. She vanished into the trees just as floodlights cut through the forest. Grace stood alone, heart pounding, knowing with absolute certainty that the game hadn't followed her into the world. The world had always been the game. And now everyone was playing. Grace didn't stop running until dawn burned the horizon a sickly gray. She stole a car from a rest stop, keys left in the ignition, radio murmuring morning news like nothing in the world had cracked open overnight. Her hands shook as she drove, knuckles white, eyes darting to every rearview reflection. Every passing vehicle felt intentional. Every billboard felt like surveillance. By the time the sun fully rose, the story was already breaking. Unconfirmed incident at private estate. Multiple casualties. No comment from authorities. Grace laughed when she heard that. A thin, humorless sound. Of course there was no comment. There never was. She ditched the car 2 states over and disappeared into a nameless town with a gas station, a diner, and a motel that smelled like bleach and regret. She paid cash. She chose a room near the stairs. She barricaded the door anyway. Only then did she collapse. Sleep came in violent fragments, no dreams, just flashes. Glass shattering. Eleanor's smile. Lila's bright, dangerous eyes. The word consequence looping like a prayer she didn't believe in yet. She woke to her phone vibrating. Not ringing. Vibrating. A burner she didn't remember buying lay on the nightstand. Grace stared at it for a long time before answering. Say it, she said. Whatever script you've written. Daniel's voice came through, quieter now. Stripped raw. You embarrassed us. Grace smiled. You murdered people for fun. Yes, Daniel snapped. And we were discreet. She rolled onto her side, staring at the peeling wallpaper. What do you want? Silence. Then, carefully, balance. Grace closed her eyes. You broke the illusion, Daniel continued. The audience saw themselves. That was never part of the design. Designs fail, Grace said. People die. People always die, Daniel replied. That's not the point. The call ended. Her phone immediately buzzed again. This time, a video. Grace hesitated, then played it. Security footage filled the screen. A familiar apartment hallway. Fluorescent lights. A door she recognized far too well. Her old building. The camera zoomed. On-screen text appeared. Live. Grace's heart slammed into her throat. The feed cut to black. A message replaced it. You taught them how to run. Now teach them how to stop. Grace sat up slowly, rage crystallizing into something hard and focused. They weren't hunting her anymore. They were punishing her. She dressed quickly, pain screaming as she moved. Every bruise reminded her she was still human. Every scar reminded her that didn't matter. She left the motel through the back exit and melted into the morning traffic. By noon, the leaks began. Names surfaced online. Not all of them, never all, but enough. Shell companies. Political donors. Board members. Philanthropists who smiled in photos taken beside dying children and burning forests. The network scrambled. So did the world. Protests erupted outside gated communities. Commentators argued on television, voices rising, faces red. Conspiracy. Hoax. Isolated incident. Grace watched it all from a laundromat, the machines rattling around her like applause she didn't want. Lila's words echoed in her head. You're too visible now. Grace realized something then, something Eleanor and Daniel had never considered. Visibility worked both ways. That night, Grace made a call of her own. Not to the police. To a woman she'd once helped escape a violent marriage. A woman who had lost everything and learned how to rebuild quietly, ruthlessly. Do you still know people? Grace asked. A pause. Then, what kind of people? The kind who don't believe in fairness anymore. Another pause. Longer. Yes, the woman said. Why? Grace looked at her reflection in the dark window, tired, bruised, eyes sharp with purpose. Because the game thinks it owns fear, Grace said. And I'm about to remind it who fear belongs to. She hung up. Across the country, in penthouses and panic rooms, phones rang. Some elites fled. Some fortified. Some laughed, convinced this was just another storm money could outwait. They were wrong. Grace didn't need to hide anymore. She needed to be seen. Because consequences didn't wear masks. They kicked down doors. And somewhere deep inside the fractured network, Eleanor watched the chaos unfold on dozens of screens, breath shallow, eyes shining with something dangerously close to joy. She's doing it, she whispered. Beside her, Lila smiled. The ritual hadn't ended. It had gone public. And there was only one chapter left. Grace stood on a rooftop. The city stretched below her like a living board, streets glinting with neon, headlights, the pulse of the oblivious. For years, the world had been a distant, safe illusion. Now it was the arena. Her hands were raw from climbing, bleeding from her last confrontation with a fence that had stood between her and her own escape. Her clothes were tattered, boots scuffed, but her eyes burned with the clarity of someone who had stared into the abyss and smiled. Behind her, the sounds of chaos thrummed in the air, sirens, alarms, the shrieks of the network scrambling as information leaked and systems failed. The maze was gone, shattered into pieces across cities, private estates, and server rooms. Their meticulous order had been replaced by something organic, something uncontrollable, the hunted turning into hunters. The earpiece crackled. Lila's voice, light, teasing, dangerous. Well? Are you going to watch them drown in panic or teach them to swim? Grace looked down at her hands. The knife wasn't enough anymore, not for this. She had become something sharper. Something faster. The game had evolved her, but she had evolved faster. I teach them to swim, she whispered, voice low, deliberate. Behind her, a shadow moved. Eleanor. Calm. Beautiful. Still terrifying. She had survived the fall of her empire of fear, at least for now. You've broken the rules, Eleanor said. Her eyes were ice and fire. The network is collapsing. You could finish this in a single step. Stop it. Contain it. Control it. Grace shook her head. You built a world that feeds on fear, and you never understood it. It's not yours anymore. Eleanor's lips curved in a cruel, knowing smile. Power is never just about fear. It's about influence. And influence lasts. Grace raised her head, scanning the streets. The elites were panicking. The network's patrons ran, hid, shouted orders into phones, but the city was already against them. Grace felt a thrill she hadn't felt in years, the dizzying, terrible clarity of someone who could finally see the chessboard. She took a step forward. Another. Her shadow stretched long across the rooftop. Grace, Eleanor's voice trembled now, though she tried to hide it. You don't know what you're doing. I do, Grace said. I'm making sure everyone remembers who's afraid of what. Below, the city ignited in chaos. Helicopters retreated. Police barricades crumbled. Social media erupted with live streams, accidental witnesses capturing fragments of the network's collapse. People screamed, ran, cried, and some fought back. Grace looked at Lila, who had reappeared silently beside her. This is just the beginning, Lila said. The ritual doesn't end. It just changes players. Grace smiled, a smile devoid of innocence, full of cold, sharp satisfaction. Then I'll change the rules. Together, they jumped. Not blindly, but with purpose. Landing on a fire escape below, they disappeared into the city's veins. Behind them, the world reacted. The wealthy and powerful scrambled, but Grace knew they couldn't hide anymore. The fear had left the maze. It was everywhere now. And she was everywhere it mattered. Eleanor watched from the rooftop above, her mask of composure slipping just enough for Grace to see it. This isn't over, she whispered. But even as she spoke, her voice betrayed awe, and a hint of fear. Grace looked up at her one last time. It never is, she said. The game had changed. The hunter had become the consequence. And in the streets, across rooftops, and in shadows everywhere, people, hunted and hunters alike, realized that someone had rewritten the rules. Grace was no longer running. She was the storm. The world was awake. And the network? It would never be the same again. Kitchen knife.